Welcome to the Crunch McDabble Show. I'm your host, the legendary Crunch McDabbles. This is the only show where we put your favorite classes head to head in a fight to the death to see which ones make an impression and which ones cause depression. Today's show, it's the Battle of the Wolves, the Wolf Monk versus the Wolf Barbarian. Woo! The monks that learn the wolf stance, they say that you have to know the wolf if you want to learn to fight like one. You have to get low and square up with your enemy. You patiently focus on every tiny move they make, waiting for just the right opening, and then striking with an unrivaled savagery. Your wolf jaw strikes are fast and relentless. They slam in damage like long swords, and they're agile and finesse. And when your opponent lets their guard down, even for a second, they punish your enemy, adding an extra damage from the backstabber trait. That is a great attack. But the true masters of the wolf stance learn the wolf drag attack. It's a brutal attack that rips your opponent off its feet. It's a 2-action attack, but it adds a fatal D12 to your attack, and if the attack hits, it knocks the target prone. There's no saving throw. There's no crying to your mommy. If this thing hits, you go down, and then you're prone, and you're flat-footed, and you have a wolf monk standing over you, ready to strike while you're vulnerable. And of course, maybe the strongest feature of the monk, they have one of the best armor classes in the game. They start off with expert proficiency right at level 1. They advance to legendary proficiency at level 17. On top of that, the wolf monk's attacks have the finesse trait, which means this monk can make dexterity their key ability and crank up that armor class right out of the gate. But then there is a different way to do the wolf. There's a group of reclusive nomads known as the Tribe of the Wolf. They revere the wolf only for its ferocity. Their wolf jaw attacks slam in a D10 piercing damage per attack, which then increases to a staggering D12 per hit at level 7. No finesse, no agile, only piercing pain. On top of that, the animal barbarian works themselves into an animalistic frenzy. They rip and tear with each of their strikes, adding horrific wounds with every hit. The rage damage increases to 5 at level 7, and then increases to 12 additional damage per hit at level 15. Boom. And they have great armor class as well. Over time, their skin literally hardens into natural armor. By level 6, they become so adept at fighting this way that their armor proficiency improves to expert, which puts them in with the most elite armor classes in the game. And by level 13, their natural armor becomes the equivalent of wearing heavy armor. But the real defense for any barbarian is the enormous pool of hit points they have and their resistance. They get a whopping 12 hit points per level, which is more than any other class. And on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, at level 9, the barbarian adds in raging resistance, which in the case of the animal instinct barbarian is resistance to piercing and slashing damage. So who is the better wolf? Let's find out together as we square off once and for all with these two combatants. On the one side, we have the monk in wolf stance with those great agile finesse D8 strikes, a fatal D12 wolf drag attack that can knock a target prone, flurry of blows, and that legendary armor class with the full maxed out dexterity. On the other side, the animal instinct wolf barbarian has D12 unarmed attacks, comparable AC, high hit points, and resistance. So who goes on a Disney World retreat and who gets their butt beat? Let's find out right now. So as these two square off, we'll put the armor classes up first. You can see it's surprisingly close. This is level 1 through 20 here. The monk has that legendary elite armor class, but look how close the animal instincts armor class. It's not that far behind. However, at the start of the fight, the barbarian drops into a rage, which decreases that armor class by 1, which causes the gap to widen a little bit. Nevertheless, the animal instinct barbarian is not as easy to hit as a typical barbarian. So we're in for a real evenly matched battle here. Now, you can see the barbarian's wolf jaw unarmed attack hits really hard. At level 7, as we said, it increases to a D12 damage, which is absurd for an unarmed attack. They are unarmed attacks that deal the same damage as a maul. And when you factor in the rage damage on top of the weapon specialization and greater weapon specialization, and the full 18 starting strength, and that brutal critical feat at level 18, the barbarian hits really, really hard. Now, the monk's wolf jaw attacks, they deal only a D8 damage, and the dexterity monk only has a 16 starting strength. They add in weapon specialization and greater weapon specialization, but that's it. The end result, the barbarian is just dominating with those thundering wolf jaw strikes. However, as the fight starts, the barbarian is running into some problems with the monk. On a full round of attacks, the barbarian's multiple attack penalty of -5 on the second attack and -10 on the third attack, it causes their damage for the round to literally fall off a cliff. The monk's high armor class really exposes and exacerbates the barbarian's lack of accuracy with their second and third attacks, and the damage for the round plummets as a result. On top of that, the monk returns a barrage of wolf jaw strikes with surprising lethality. The barbarian is easier to hit, and the agile attacks are more accurate with the second and third attack. As a result, the damage for the round starts to add up. But then, after level 6, the wolf drag attack, followed by a flurry of blows, is a game changer. The wolf drag attack, at maximum attack bonus, is a fatal D12, which means on critical hits, it's treated as a D12 attack. Also, if that attack hits, it knocks the target prone. And then the monk follows up with a flurry of wolf jaw attacks that have the backstabber trait. If the barbarian is prone, those two attacks are against a flat-footed target with a -2 armor class, and they add in extra damage from the backstabber trait. Also, if the barbarian is knocked prone, they need to use an action to stand back up on their turn. This decreases the damage on the barbarian's third attack because there is a chance they would have to use this action standing back up. So we factor in the probability that the monk hits with their first attack and decrease the damage on the barbarian's third attack by that percentage. So what we end up with is the monk, despite dealing less damage per hit, is dealing quite a bit more damage per round because they have a higher armor class and faster, better attacks. You see that? The monk is actually out-damaging the barbarian for the round. But then, while the monk may be dealing more damage in the round, that doesn't necessarily mean they're winning the fight. Here is the thing. Barbarians can take these hits. They're made to take the punishment. The barbarian has all the hit points to take a beating, round in and round out. So how does that factor in here? To account for the hit points for each class, we take the hit points and divide it by the amount of damage that their opponent can deal in a round. This gives us a number that represents exactly how many rounds it takes for the monk to knock out the barbarian. And then we compare the same value for the barbarian to see how long it will take to knock out the monk. Then we compare the values to see who would be the last one standing and win the fight. So, for example, in the first round, the monk is dealing 10.5 damage for the round, but it's trying to take down the barbarian that has 23 hit points. At the same time, the barbarian is dealing only 9.2 damage per round, but it's attacking the monk who only has 20 hit points. The result is the barbarian would knock out the monk in 2.17 rounds, while the monk, even though they're dealing more damage, it would take them 2.19 rounds to take down the barbarian, which means the barbarian is knocking out the monk a fraction of a round before the monk does. And so when we make these comparisons, you can see that it goes back and forth early on. But the barbarian really hits its stride after 6th level with that armor class boost. Then at level 13, when the monk gets their armor class boost to master proficiency, it swings the other way, and the monk starts to dominate. What we see is it goes back and forth, each one fighting for dominance at various levels. But there is one more factor here. Starting at level 9, the barbarian adds raging resistance. It's going to reduce the damage of each of the monk's attack by 6, 7, or 8, and then at level 20, with the unstoppable Juggernaut feat, it blocks 13 damage on each of the monk's hits. For the monk, who's stacking a flurry of attacks together to get their damage up, the overall damage for the round plummets because of this. Look what happens starting here at level 9 when the raging resistance kicks in. The monk's hits just aren't penetrating that tough resistance, and they can't pump in enough damage to compensate. The number of rounds it takes the monk to get the barbarian down spikes as high as 11 or 12 sometimes, which means it would take 11 or 12 rounds to get the barbarian down. That's pretty tough. You're never going to win in that situation. Taking this into account, the monk only wins at level 2, 4, and 5, and at level 17 and 18. At level 2, 4, and 5, the barbarian's raging resistance hasn't kicked in yet, and then at level 17 and 18, the monk jumps to legendary armor class, while the barbarian still has only expert armor class at that time. And that big discrepancy in armor class, a +4 difference, the monk wins those rounds. But it's short-lived, because at level 19, the barbarian increases to master proficiency, which pushes them back over the top, over the monk. The winner, by decisive knockout, Animal Instinct Wolf Barbarian.
What is he?
Final thoughts. Okay. Sure, the Animal Instinct's barbarian's hit points, their armor class, their resistance, that was all, and their big attacks, the big hits, those were all too much for the monk. That being said, do not dismiss the monk. First of all, the monk could have switched to a different fighting style that deals bludgeoning damage, and that would bypass the barbarian's resistance, and we would be right back into a dogfight again. And that is one of the strengths of the monk, their ability to change and adapt to the circumstances with different stances. On top of that, over time, their unarmed attacks bypass magic resistance, silver resistance, cold iron resistance, and even adamantine resistance. So while the barbarian hits hard, it isn't anywhere near as adaptable. They can always only deal 1 or 2 types of unarmed attack damages, and these unarmed attacks won't bypass resistance. And if they switch to another weapon, they lose out on their rage damage, which makes it not even worth it. So the monk is pretty stout. Honestly, it was just cool that even punching into the barbarian's strength, even hitting them with the very attacks that the barbarian was resistant to, they were still able to hold their own and even win 5 out of 20 rounds. That's pretty impressive when you think about it. Another thing I thought was really notable here was how important armor class was. The fight goes back and forth at various levels based on increases to armor class. If you have an armor class advantage over your opponent, you can really leverage that into a win. As an example, I switched this monk from a strength monk to a dex monk, which adds a +1 to armor class at varying levels at the expense of 1 damage. The overall result was this fight was much closer when averaged out with the dex build over the strength build, and that's why I went with it. Another avenue that's worth mentioning quickly, a wolf monk could easily have Stunning Fist at level 4, which I think would be thematically pretty cool for a wolf monk. A wolf that attacks you could kind of stun you. That would mean that if any of their flurry of blows attacks hit, the barbarian has to make a fortitude save and could be stunned 1 or even stunned 3 on a critical failure. The probability is whether one of the 2 flurry attacks hit, which is surprisingly high, even for a second and third attack. It's around 50% that at least one of those hit. And then the chance that the barbarian fails their save, which is less than 50% because the barbarian has that freaky high fortitude save, it results somewhere around a 25% chance each round to add in a stun. And while that is significant and could have altered this fight, especially since that would have sometimes been combined with knocking the target prone too, and could use up actions in a round, the problem is that the barbarian also has a stun chance from their unarmed attacks on critical hits, from the critical specialization effect with unarmed attacks, which they get at level 5. And the monk doesn't get that. In the end, the monk might have an advantage here, but I left it just as a wash to cut down on variables in this. I think the monk would have a little bit of an advantage, but not that much. One other avenue for the monk, Wholeness of Body is a single action that is one of the better self-heals, So you could have a monk that is adding in hit points up to 3 times in the combat, and that could swing the tide a bit. But while the heal is pretty nice at higher levels, in the end I just left it as a wash again to cut down on variables, because the barbarian also has temporary hit points when they rage, and they have a single action ability at level 8 that can add in 10 hit points each round. Final conclusions: the animal instinct barbarian is the real deal. Those unarmed attacks make them a bona fide killer. That armor class is surprisingly good even while raging. The hit points are astounding on barbarians, which is no surprise, and the resistance to slashing and piercing damage, you can't go wrong there. I also like the theme of an animal instinct barbarian. It'd be fun to crank up the wisdom and give them various scent and perception abilities and really lean into that wild animal type of role. On top of that, you could get their movement speed up pretty high, I just think it would be fun to play a savage beast that runs around the battlefield ripping opponents apart. And it definitely would be a useful addition to any party. No question about it. And that is it. I've been your host, Crunch McDabbles. This has been the Crunch McDabbles Show. Survive Golarion with the Animal Instinct Barbarian. They are a real winner. At least today they were.
What is he? Oh, that's not even. Okay.
His name is McDabbles, and you know, he is the one who makes the Crunch McDabble Show.